Hello, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really glad that we're able to have this chat. My name is Kelsey Brown. I'm the communication strategist for the University Library, and I'm really glad that we're able to take this time. So I have just a few questions for you in regards to your work in the bibliography for our first and second copies of the bibliography here for University Library. So first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me, Kelsey. My name is Melanie Sabado-Liwag. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Public Health, and I'm also the director of the Master of Public Health program that is run out of Page in downtown LA. I am also a health disparities and minority health researcher. I really work more with communities of color, those who are marginalized and those who are vulnerable to specific poor health outcomes. And I've been working in the field of health disparities and minority health for many years, specifically with Asian and Pacific Islander groups, as well as African American Black women and Latino families.
Tell me a little bit about where you grew up, where you went to college, and then did that inform getting into public health and how you began to help these communities?
So I'm actually born and bred here in LA.
Oh, wow.
I'm actually originally from West Covina. And I was born in West Covina. I was raised in West Covina. I lived within the whole block. My entire family lived in the same block and grew up with all my cousins. But that also inspired me to seek other things outside of my little bubble. My family has really been stricken by cancer, and specifically all the women on my mother's side, so maternal health, my maternal side of my family have all been diagnosed or have passed away from breast cancer. And so at a younger age, I was very cognizant about that, and I wanted to get into medicine. And so I wanted to then explore both that passion of, cancer and understanding how that really affects my family and my want to leave my little bubble. So I ended up going to University of Washington in Seattle. I majored both in biology and psychology with, a hope that I was going to get into medicine. But unfortunately, my mom had passed away from colon cancer while I was 20 years old. And as much as I aspired to want to continue, as much as I wanted to continue on that path of exploring more cancer and cancer prevention and cancer control, like any immigrant family, my dad had asked me to come back home and really support the family after graduation. Although I built a portfolio, I ended up working at, Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center for a fellowship, during my senior year, and I had done, an honors thesis. I ended up coming back and I ended up working at City of Hope and thinking, I'm just going to work there for a couple of years and then, apply for medical school. But, I'm a true believer that a lot of things happen for a reason. What ends up happening was I met my mentor there, and she had said, why don't you go get a master in public health while you're waiting to go to medical school to really decide what path you want to take. And I never really got that mentorship from anybody in the past. And so I really took her advice. And even though I was working full-time at City of Hope, I found a night program at Cal State Fullerton. That's who I was inspired by, was my mentor there. And she's now at UCI, and that's Dr. Sora Tanjasiri. She inspired me and introduced me to all these wonderful people in the Pacific Islander population in Southern California. And out of her work, through what she initially had called WinCart. She had actually asked me, would you rather go get a PhD or MD? And I said, my heart is really set on going to medical school. I really put my faith in what she saw, and I ended up applying to a PhD program as well. And as I was waiting for PhD programs, I actually applied for medical school as well, because I had taken my MCAT. So I was like, I might as well take it. I ended up getting my PhD at Claremont Graduate University at the School of Community and Global Health. I spent, a really great deal of time and effort with all the work that is being done on the east side of LA County, which, includes, some of the areas that are very much more populated for, minorities that are moving out that way. It really inspired me to continue doing more work with the Pacific Islander population, and working more with data disaggregation and what do we do at a more national level? So I ended up going and getting a postdoc at the National Institutes of Health, specifically the National Institutes of Minority Health and Health Disparities in Bethesda, Maryland. I was really inspired by the work that we were doing there and really focusing more on what is going on with people and minorities and ethnic communities in regards to substance use, particularly tobacco. I ended up coming back to LA. My family was here, and so I found a really nice home at Cal State LA. I found a niche for myself. I really wanted to still give back to a community that was giving me so much, such as like my mentorship and the communities that I was working with while I was training during my master's and my PhD program, that I felt like I needed to continue with the pipeline. So working with more minority first generation students, immigrant students who really didn't really truly have access to other people of color that could really pipe them up to higher education. And I really was inspired by that. Coming back to LA, I ended up reconnecting with the Pacific Islander community, in addition to all the other minority communities that I was working with. Particularly the Filipino community here in Los Angeles and the Pacific Islander communities that were spread out throughout Southern California. What inspired me to contribute to this particular work among Pacific Islanders and mental health was very much derived from WinCart. We actually had a cessation program for young adults, a tobacco cessation program for young adults. And we started to realize that in order to change health behavior, we really had to look at the person holistically, both, culturally, what are they experiencing familial and community-wise, and what's happening internally to prevent or promote further, behavioral change that is good behavior, good health behaviors. I actually got a grant, as well as other colleagues that we were working with Pacific Islanders to really explore this further in regards to how mental health can really affect someone's choices, health behavior-wise, lifestyle choices, and how that really affects the person in totality. People don't often realize that mental health is very much the root of, our motivations. And that health is not just physical, but also mental and social. And it's not just, the mere absence of disease or infirmity. And that's the definition from the WHO. So long story short, that's kind of like how I came back into this full circle from, where I was raised and, where I am today here at Cal State LA.
It's really interesting to hear about how your personal experiences in your early life and your family life really prompted and pushed you onto a career path, and not just from your experiences, but like the involvement of a mentor. And I hear that so often from people, that like this one conversation I had with a mentor changed the direction I thought I was going, or made me think of something else and pushed me on a different path. And I'm so glad we had that conversation, And one of the reasons why I chose the work that you're involved in our bibliography is given the current climate of so many hate crimes against Asian Americans in this country. I mean, we must be in the thousands at this point. I don't know the statistic, but it's ridiculous, the amount of things that are going on right now. Can you speak a little bit about, if you can, to anything in your research that you featured in our bibliography that kind of speaks to the current climate, access to mental health resources for Asian Americans, anything like that?
Yeah, so Asian and Pacific Islanders in general for mental health, although they might have access, it is an issue of utilization, meaning many of them are not getting diagnosed. So there's a problem with underdiagnosis. There's also a big problem with stigma and utilizing mental health services. And so that's something that we're actually going to be publishing soon, is in regards to how the community wants to talk more about mental health and how mental health is not mental illness. A lot of people use the term synonymously, and it's very, very different. And mental health is, your emotions. It's a state of mind. It's your feelings. It's, it can change depending on the situation. And it's not just all negative. Mental health is also the beautiful aspects of like resilience and perseverance and, those grit type of traits that, often are innate, but it's also learned through family and through community. And so mental health is not just a personal thing, and a lot of people say it's like individual, but it very much is at what we do at a public health level is saying that it's interpersonal, so it's between people, right? It's also at a family level, and mental health and health is at a community level, and as well as an organizational level, right? So in all those different levels, we have to find some level of good wellness, positive wellness. I think the problem that we often see with Asian and Pacific Islanders now, with what is going on with mental health and maybe what's going on with, systemic racism and discrimination, is the fact that, we're immigrants to this country. We've always been seen as the model minority, and we're pinned against other ethnic groups to then be a comparison. Or to be utilized as a tool to say, hey, these are the type of people that you should be like. And we're all not created the same. I mean, there's so many Asian Pacific Islanders. We occupy half of the world, and we are also distributed everywhere throughout the United States and throughout the world, doing a number of different laborious jobs, from healthcare all the way down to very blue-collared work. But I think systemically, what we've been pinned against as well is this idea that we have to just put our head down, adapt, and not say anything. And I think through many generations, that has been passed on, that, we don't shake the boat. We don't, we just work hard and we just do our thing. But as we start to realize with this new generation of people that are more identifying as Asian American or raised as second generation immigrants, they have a little bit more of an identity struggle that is more tied to, wanting to celebrate their culture, right? But also knowing full well that their culture is very much tied to American culture, and that they have a voice, and we have to stand up against some type of institutionalized problem, and that the only way to do that is through civic movement. And I think that's the biggest issue that we often have. Again, this issue of immigrant culture and just working hard and being resilient. And that's how previous families are, and our parents are, I can say for me. But also, there's many of us who feel like this can no longer continue because it is systemic, it is institutionalized, but it's also mediated and internalized through many years of, this type of behavior within our own American culture. But I think it's different in different places. So here in LA, we are very shoulder to shoulder with so many different people of different colors and different races and different backgrounds that we're almost living in a bubble. And when we see other people experience racism or discrimination, or even experience it ourselves, we don't even realize it. Sometimes we just think that it's normal. But then, if you look at it outside from a different perspective, it truly isn't. And so I think I highly encourage more and more people nowadays, specifically Asian and Pacific Islanders, to educate themselves first, and understand there's a bystander effect that's really happening, and we should not be just a bystander to our own problems. But there's also other things that we can do, like calling to action, working with organizations and groups to amplify this voice, writing to our legislators and voicing out our opinions about how these things need to be recognized, and how other subgroups of ethnic groups are basically invisible. And that's how all the other Asian subgroups, such as like other Latino subgroups, get categorized into one monolithic group, when in actuality, we are very distinct. We're very different. Our immigration history is different. Our experiences with the American culture is different. And so to clump us together really is an injustice to our ancestors who really struggled to make sure that we have a prosperous future.
Do you see that a lot in mental health access? Like, do you see a certain sub-community of API is more likely to get mental health resources or look for them and others aren't? And how do you address that as a public health professional?
So it is such a loaded question. Thank you so much for asking that. I think at this point, we're trying to work with communities to understand the severity, but also the likelihood of people wanting, right? Because I can get wholly like theoretical in terms of, academics and say, there's theories and, behaviors of change and steps and all these things. But, to be honest, in the community, they just want to serve, right? And they want to be able to serve people where they are and where they're at. And so I think one of the biggest things that we are encountering with the pandemic is that there has always been maybe underlying levels of high stress or high depression or high anxiety. And what ends up happening is that the pandemic, due to the lockdown, due to further isolation, due to grieving and experiencing death at nominal amounts and consistently, it becomes a little bit heavy, and that threshold that people normally function then gets surpassed, and these people start to realize that they might need a little bit more self-care, but more than that, meaning they would need more social support, seeking therapy, seeking counseling, getting diagnosed, because they can no longer function the way that they did before the pandemic. So I say this because there is a lot of stigma to even just look for it. And I think people are not realizing that mental health resources are wide and in between, meaning you can literally talk to someone that you trust, and it could be a pastor, it could be a coach, it could be a mentor, it could be a peer mentor. There are also, peer groups to attend. And all of it is trying to focus and zooming in on identifying for yourself those triggers and identifying how to put actionable and reasonable action items that can be sustained over time. So I think oftentimes the reason why there's a big stigma among not just API communities, but I think just immigrant communities in general and BIPOC communities is because of this idea that, it's one more thing to draw attention to me and my family and my culture. And we don't want to be looked or frowned upon or to be pitied upon. And so I think it has that idea of, I owe nothing to anybody, and I don't want anybody to have to look to me as if I'm the burden. That is the biggest problem we have in our community, is being a burden. And we don't want that social stigma to be placed upon us. So for instance, if I were to look for, some type of, help outside of my family, it's almost as if I disgraced my family because I couldn't keep it internal, or my family couldn't help me. And sometimes that attitude or the thinking is very traditional. It's very old school. Where at the time, of course, that's the art of survival, right? But now that there are, a plethora of resources, that everybody is trying to thrive and survive at the same time, and that we shouldn't have to solely rely on our family to continuously be the only support system we have. That is the kind of change thought process that we are experiencing. So in terms of answering your first question about identifying specific groups of people, I think younger people nowadays understand that mental health is important. They are more likely to talk about it. They're more likely to encourage other people to look for it. And I think it's because, social media has its good and its bad. Meaning, like right now, there's so many webinars. There's so many groups of people who are like, let's get together. But then you also have the opposite, where it's like you're completely zoomed out. And there's just a lot of information to go through, and you're doing it all through isolation. But I think that there's also groups of people, like older groups of people, who are extremely resilient. And they're like, oh, pandemic, we got this. Like, this is nothing, And I'm like, you guys are just an example of grit and perseverance. And I think it's because they've experienced so much more struggle, that this is just another feather in their cap, maybe, in their thought process. Meaning that they might identify moments of depressive symptoms or moments of high stress or moments of high anxiety, but it's not necessarily sustained for longer periods of time than, say, for instance, younger folks who are younger, who are experiencing, who do not know how to cope. So I think it's increasing the message of finding resources, people, places that work for you, finding outlets that are going to provide you the right, proper education on coping mechanisms, educating yourself on actionable items to pursue growth, and to pursue stronger ties of social support, removing that stigma for themselves and stigmatizing other people in regards to seeking those mental health services. It's really hard right now because the pandemic really put, a double-edged sword on everything. We want to help, there's services out there, but like, how do you really reach people if you're not physically there to have the trust? Because mental health is really based on trust too. I think that's what people need to understand, is that we need to approach problems in our society from a multi-level lens and a multi-level perspective. It is not just one-sided. It's not one size fits all either. And a lot of things that we create in public health, or within our interdisciplinary sectors, is to then think about how do we approach communities for sustainability. So not just saying, here, like, put a Band-Aid on it, here you go, here's some programs, but really working with communities so that the intergenerational trauma that's passed on from generation to generation breaks, and that there is some type of system that is then newly created or fixed to then identify people to break that stigma around accessing and utilizing mental health, specifically among people who are at higher risk of, mental health issues. And I'm not saying that all nurses are going to experience high trauma, high stress, or that all people who are all isolated or old are going to have, high levels, high stress. I mean, again, everybody has a specific threshold for, specific things. And so I think we need to really honor that with specific communities.
So just to wrap up here, I'm going to ask everyone this question, and I want to hear a little bit more about your experience at Cal State LA, and what do you like best about teaching at Cal State LA?
So I think what I really love about Cal State LA is really the multicultural environment. I think students don't realize when faculty or instructors say that we learn just as much every semester. It really is true. I don't say to students that I teach anything. I don't teach them anything new. I just share what I know and I repackage it so that they fully can understand how to utilize that information and put it out there through application. And I often tell my students, like, you guys experience what disparity is. You understand what multicultural adaptation means. You guys all have experienced some type of stressor that is related to your ethnic identity or some issue in regards to where we live, such as an urban society in LA County. And all of that is experience that you can bring along into the workforce and into the work field. You just have to tap into it. And so I think that's kind of the most exciting part, is that, these students can be hungry, they can have potential, but it is really up to us as leaders in the field, as their instructors, as mentors, as scholars, as researchers, to really identify that spark in them and, fan the flame, as we can say. Everybody needs that type of attention. It just takes one person. I found that our student population is very inspiring in that sense. I also love the fact that we're an underdog. I think that's one of the things that I've really been inspired by Cal State LA, is that we're really at the center of LA County. Yes, we're next to USC, and they're a big dog, but they're a big dog with a lot of, they already have an established setting here in LA. But I don't think that they have the richness of the students that we have, that have experienced, the life issues that many young adults have to face at a young age, such as working full-time, part-time, having to take care of, being the caretaker of their family, having to sacrifice more than what they have to, or even experiencing a system before coming to Cal State LA where, they aren't able to get, the top-notch grades that can get them into an Ivy League school, for instance, because of the other issues that they have to experience and deal with, while they were in high school or middle school. And all of that adolescent trauma is really culminating into their experiences, but it also is culminating into the growth that they bring to an employer. And I think that's something that inspires me most definitely.
Well, you mentioned that the students are inspiring to you, and it sounds to me, just in the 40 minutes we've been chatting, that you're so inspiring to your students as well. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time out today to chat with us, or to chat with me, I should say. And I really look forward to seeing you when we're back on campus in real life.
I most definitely. Thank you so much for your time, Kelsey. I really enjoyed just talking about this with you.